Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Beyond Horizons. 13 episodes later and well over a year in space, we have finally arrived at Juna. This ship, the Valkyrie, left before we even had SSTO technology, before we'd even thought about going to Eve with the Orpheus probes. I mean, this has been a long time waiting. But the wait is finally over and I cannot tell you how excited I am that we are actually here at Juna now. I mean, I've done many a mission to Juna over the years, but it's always very exciting when it finally arrives and we can start doing the all-important science gathering, which starts with Cerbus coming boldly stepping out of the Valkyrie into the vacuum of space, where they notice that apparently the hammering is slightly see-through, which is a bit of a weird graphical glitch. Speaking of, you might have noticed that the textures on the actual ship have changed around a bit between the cinematic and now. I launched this before I swapped from the restock mod to the texture replacer, and so this was using restock colorings, and now it doesn't really know how to color them right, so I get a bit of a continuity error, but we'll move past it. Now, while we wait for Hela II to come into orbit around Juna so we can actually get down to the surface, we're going to stay in high space so we can collect all the science there, and then in a few days we will lower our orbit and collect all of the science from down there as well. As for Pod 2, which will take us to Ike, we will do that once we've been to the surface of Juna. I think that's our priority at the moment. Meanwhile, we still have to maintain the rest of our space program. So here we are checking back with Echo 2, which is on its way to Moho. We have a course correction maneuver to perform, just to try and bring us a bit closer to Moho, and then we need to start seeing what other maneuvers we can perform to actually bring us to the planet, because we actually aren't on course even after this correction burn. Luckily, this craft has loads of Delta V, so it shouldn't really be a problem. We should at least be able to get a flyby and from there maybe perform a few gravitational assists to get us into orbit around Moho. So we should get there. It might just take us a bit longer than I was first initially expecting. I had actually made another maneuver node to try and test this, but this was over like 3 kilometers of Delta V, and while I actually do have more Delta V than I need for this, for some reason it's not showing the last stage's Delta V total, but I felt like it was too expensive. Luckily I started editing it and I managed to bring it down a lot more, and I think this will get us a good flyby, and hopefully we might even be able to get into orbit from there, but we'll have to wait and see when we get there. So while we wait for our various probes and spaceships to get to their destinations, we've got a little time to do some R&D. We now return to the Deep Star project, which is the development of submarines for extraterrestrial oceans. The last version of this project was an unmanned submarine, so this time we're trying to update it for, to be crewed essentially. Initially we had Lathe in mind when developing these submarines as our target, but I don't think we're going to get a Jool mission put together in time for the next transfer window. And what with our Eve project, it's taking up most of our resources and attention, but Eve does have oceans as well. Now, granted, they are explodium seas, and I don't know how safe it would actually be to submerge my kerbals in that, but we'll do it anyway in the name of science. I had a little bit of debate whether I should send a submarine to Eve, because of course, this mission is already looking to be pretty huge. We're developing a surface base. We've got our launch vehicle that's going to get crew off the surface of Eve. I'm thinking about maybe making a rover as well, and we also have the propeller plane, so we're sending a lot there, and I wasn't sure whether I should also add a submarine to the mix, but why not? I want to see what's at the bottom of Eve's oceans. So this is Deep Star 2. It has a few problems, the main of which being I've offset the command pod there away from the body a little bit. And this actually it hinders the buoyancy and it doesn't really go in the direction that it's pointing. So I want to try and make that a bit more in line for the final design. It's also only able to withstand pressures up to 300 meters below sea level, and that's on Kerbin, so it might not be quite as deep for Eve. And I'm not really sure if there's anything I can do about that. I'll have to look into it. So yeah, plenty more work to do with this project before it's ready to go to Eve. So that was Hela II just getting docked to the Valkyrie, and now we're just refueling it because we did have to use a little bit of our landing fuel to get into orbit around Juna, but hopefully that shouldn't really affect our return journey too much. We've got loads of fuel here on the Valkyrie, and I'm planning on ditching the middle fuel tank, so we'll transfer it all to the back when we run low, and that way we can minimize the mass of the vessel and increase our delta V. So yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem at all. Cerbus takes one more spacewalk just to check everything over and make sure that Hela II is ready for descent before getting in. Her and Ailming will be the brave Kerbals to set their boots down on the dusty red planet. So without further ado, let us commence the landing. And that is touchdown on Juna, and I picked about the worst landing spot that I could have. You can see we landed on a pretty steep slope, and I would keep sliding down, so I used a little bit of our fuel to get further down the hill. I actually had to make 2 hops. I omitted one of them for the sake of the cinematic, but even then I still had to wait ages for this thing to slide down the hill to a point where it would stop, but I got there eventually. I was a little concerned about my fuel margins for getting back into orbit, but we'll worry about that later. For now, let us focus on making history and getting our boots on the rusty ground. After messing around and building sandcastles in the sands of Juna, they get a broadcast from Mission Control that it's time to get on with their jobs and do some science. Begrudgingly, Cerbus goes about setting up the ground experiments that will continue running after we leave. Unfortunately, all we have with us is a mystery goo experiment and a seismometer, because when we sent this mission we didn't have access to all the fancy weather analyzers and ionographers and all that, so we're just making do with the small amount of scientific equipment we have. After all the science has been set up, the PR team demand that Cerbus and Julford take some good photos for the press, so they get on with that immediately. Julford and Cerbus will spend a night on Duna doing all of the science and getting a bit of kip before heading back to the Valkyrie. In the meantime, the Valkyrie is going to lower its orbit into low space so that we can get all the science from that region. And also I want to be in as low an orbit as possible because I'm a bit worried about the fuel reserves on Hela II, so we're going to make it the shortest journey possible for them. And arguably more important than the science is getting those sweet cinematic shots. We'll check back in with the Valkyrie and Hela II in the next episode. To wrap up today's episode, we're going to test the next generation of Hermes launcher. So as you can see, this is much bigger than the previous Hermes. Unfortunately, we don't have a cargo bay, we are just using a disposable fairing for the payload, but we literally just don't have cargo bays big enough for the sort of things that this is going to be launching. Now, rather bravely, I'm testing this with an actual payload. Often I like to just have a dummy payload, just so I can see if the thing actually works, but I don't know, I was feeling pretty confident with this one for some reason. So yeah, I was saying earlier we probably don't have time to orchestrate a large mission to Jool. Unfortunately, the transfer window is now upon us, so I've cobbled together a quick little probe. The probe is called Demeter, the goddess of harvest, because it is designed to go to every moon around Jool and harvest all of the science there. And you might be able to see from the staging list there, it's quite a complicated probe. It's made out of two main stages, both of which are asparagus staged, which isn't very Kessler syndrome friendly, but also gives us an insane amount of range. And there we are, deploying the fairing to reveal Demeter with its sleek silver paint job. And there we are, Demeter's finally deployed. The upper stage there is the first use of the nuclear engine in this playthrough, which is what gives it the 12 kilometers of Delta V, so hopefully that's more than enough to get us to Jool and do all the moon hopping that we want. But it will have to depart in the next episode, because for now we are going to bring back Hermes II. I realise I haven't actually said much about it yet. Yeah, it's actually pretty decent at what it does. It does get things into orbit pretty efficiently, but I had some strange Kraken-y encounters on the way back down. But yeah, it uses 15 of the vector engines, and I haven't actually sat down and calculated how much it's able to carry into orbit, but it's quite a lot. It is certainly a heavy lifter. I wasn't sure how this thing would come down, and yeah, I undershot the space center a little bit, so I just fired the engines to make sure we definitely land in the ocean, because this thing is very tall and very heavy, so I figured if I land on the ground and tip over, it's probably going to break. There it is, screaming through the upper atmosphere under a beautiful sunrise, and there we lose a few of the air brakes. Yeah, I think maybe my trajectory was a little steep on the way down, so next flight will have to be a bit shallower. Now, I said in the last episode I wanted to explore powered descent, just using the engines and no parachutes, and I think this flight kind of solidifies the need for that. Apart from undershooting the KSC and a few of the air brakes melting off, the descent was going absolutely fine, and when the parachutes deployed I was feeling pretty comfortable. But veterans of the game may know that physics warp and parachutes are not good friends at all. And in my impatience, I foolishly tried to do 4 times physics warp with all of these parachutes deployed, and, well, I'll just let you see what happened. Yep, so in a second of game time, we went from cruising through the atmosphere very slowly to exploding violently and scattering debris all over the ocean. And rather amusingly, this engine shroud flies like a frisbee down to the water, which I thought was a nice little way for it to come down. But yeah, unfortunately, the first flight of Hermes II ends in, well, a Kraken-induced tragedy. Now, I'm glad I was recording this next bit, because this explosion was so violent that when I went to go and collect the debris from the ocean, I realized that the explosion had caused the rest of the debris to go on an interstellar trajectory, and not just an interstellar trajectory, it's out of the orbital plane, and I cannot stress to you how much energy that requires. I mean, inclination changes around solar orbit are very expensive maneuvers, and so to have an explosion throw all of this on like such a diagonal trajectory out of the stellar field is crazy. Behold the power of the Kraken, we live in awe and reverence of its might. I was really tempted to jump to one of these bits of debris just to see where it was, but then I realised that I don't think they're really meant to be where they are, because obviously the explosion was not exactly normal physics, so I thought if I jump to it I might corrupt the game, and so I just terminated all of the debris so the game would run a bit smoother and we don't tempt the Kraken any further. And with that, it's time to wrap up today's episode. It was a bit of a longer one today, just had a bit more to show, because it was obviously a very exciting and historic episode. But if you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and if you want to catch up with older episodes, you can check out the playlist that this is in. But I've been Moonfish1001, and I'll see you in the next video.